Hey, good morning, everybody. We'll make a start. Always trust the TUC to turn up a bit late. Thank you. Good to see you there. I'm Mckeever, and I'm the chair of the Garment and Textile Workers Trust. I'll come on to who we are in a minute, but this is our first event at Labour Conference, which is entitled Making Made in Britain a Badge of Pride. The Garment and Textile Workers Trust was founded with an initial donation from Boohoo, but was independent of it, and it's designed to help mitigate some of the impacts that take place in the community, specifically in Leicester, around mitigating and hopefully improving and eliminating modern-day slavery in the garment and textile supply chain. I'm joined on my right by Philippa Roberts, who will introduce herself in a minute, from Hope for Justice, with whom we work, Cheryl Chung from Boohoo, and Tony Tinley from Unite the Union. We were due to be joined by Councillor Adam Clark, Deputy City Mayor of Leicester, but as I'm sure as you appreciate, with the ongoing issues on the ground in Leicester at the moment, he has to stay and oversee some community cohesion work. So Philippa, would you like to start by introducing yourself?
So thank you, and it's great to be here today. So I'm Philippa Roberts, Head of Policy Research at Hope for Justice, and also a solicitor by trade. So just to tell you a little bit about Hope for Justice, we're an international anti-slavery charity that works in over 32 locations with a vision to change lives in slavery by preventing exploitation, identifying victims, restoring lives and reforming society. In the UK, our programmes consist of training to build capacity into both statutory and non-statutory services to enable them to respond to issues of exploitation and slavery. We have community engagement specialists who are from communities and work with communities to prevent exploitation and identify potential victims. And we provide long-term independent advocacy and support to survivors of modern slavery through our independent modern slavery advocacy model. We have a business focus, so our business focus division, Slavery Alliance, provides services to companies and public bodies seeking to protect their operations and supply chains from slavery. And we utilise all our frontline programming work to create the evidence base for change, because without driving policy and systemic change, we simply cannot end these issues. Just to tell you a bit about our work in the East Midlands, we have a hub working in Leicester, and we have worked to build bridges of trust into the community and provided a conduit between those at risk of exploitation and statutory bodies, developing interventions that are appropriate and proportionate to the cultural sensitivities and nuances of the community, and assisted people to sustainable independence, offering viable alternatives to exploitation. Also working on system strengthening and helping stakeholders to improve their own purchasing and employment practices. Key to all our work, both locally, nationally and internationally, is collaboration and partnership working, absolutely key. So my particular relevant experiences in the area is I've over 50 years experience in working specifically in the field of modern slavery, both in South Asia and the UK, but also advise across our fields offices internationally. But I've also worked directly with survivors, so I have frontline experience and work to build programming on the front line, and now I'm taking that experience to work in policy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheryl.
Hi, good morning everybody. Can you hear me okay? We're getting a real echo up here, so hopefully, yeah, thank you, Brent.
I feel like I'm at a swimming class.
Good morning everybody. My name is Cheryl Chung. I'm Head of Corporate Affairs for the Boohoo Group. And my role here today, I guess, is because I've been heavily involved with the business since the allegations of labour exploitation emerged in 2020. And I guess just to talk to you a little bit and give you a little bit of background of what we've done as a business since then, specifically in the establishment of the Garment and Textile Workers Trust. But in June 2020, allegations came to the fore, and the business immediately appointed Alison Levitt QC to do an investigation into what was happening in Leicester. That report that she produced for us was published within about 60 hours of receiving it, warts and all, and as you can imagine, it made incredibly unpleasant reading. And she made a host of recommendations, 17 recommendations that we accepted in full, and created a programme called the Agenda for Change, which was our response to ensuring that everything that she had recommended that needed to be done, we did as a business. And I was part of the team with a group of people from across the business who delivered the Agenda for Change. In November 2020, we appointed Sir Brian Leveson and KPMG to oversee that work and to ensure that we delivered on what we were doing. And I guess mark your homework, if you like, and I have to tell you, it's not a very pleasant experience having your homework marked by Sir Brian Leveson and KPMG. But we reported into them weekly on the action that we were taking. And in January of this year, they signed that work off as complete. Now, clearly that doesn't mean the work is done and we've ticked a box and everything is ready. That was basically the end of the beginning, because that was about implementing systems. And so the work continues and is now business as usual, and it's about ensuring that that work continues to happen. But in relation to what we're talking about today, a key part of that was establishing the Garment and Textile Workers Trust, of which Kevin is the chair, and Philippa's CEO, Tim, is one of our trustees. And that work is overseen by the group of trustees who, I think it was a year ago, agreed that to understand what needed to be done, we needed to have the voice of the worker. And that isn't dismissing the enormous amount of research that's been done into garment and textile working. But what was lacking, in our opinion, as a group of trustees, was the voice of the worker. And so we appointed Nottingham University's Human Rights Lab to talk to people on the ground and understand what they needed. And unfortunately, in some experiences, there was no silver bullet, but it gave us an enormous amount of insight in what needed to happen. And that work is now beginning to be established by the Trust. The group at Boohoo also opened our own factory as a centre of excellence in Leicester. And that factory has got a number of purposes, obviously to provide employment and create clothes. But in terms of backing Britain, I think it makes a statement about what the business decided to do in June of 2020. Because there was a choice to be made then, which was simply, do we continue to source here and do the right thing and try and fix what's broken? Or do we do what many other retailers in this country have done and go sourcing abroad? And the clear answer was, no, we need to stay here and fix it. And that's, reputationally has been an enormous challenge, and operationally and financially has been an enormous challenge, but it absolutely was the right thing to do. And actually what Thurmaston Lane has done is prove that you can produce clothes in this country legally, ethically and safely at the price point that we sell them, in an environment where we've got amazing staff, and we're doing a double shift, which is quite unusual. The second shift has just started, and we are not at full capacity because we're trying to upskill people to move away from what Leicester has become renowned for, which is simple jersey garments. So we are upskilling the people in the area to produce more tailored and skilled clothing. And actually, you may or may not know that we own a brand called Dorothy Perkins, which was, I think, first opened its doors in 1908, but hasn't sourced clothing in this country for decades, and now produces clothes at Thurmaston Lane, which we are immensely proud of. Well, from a reputational point of view, I think, Tony and I have talked about this. The business is part of the AGMPPP with, I think, 18 other retailers in Leicester. And we are doing a trial with the unions to understand, based on what we've learned from both the AGMPPP and what we've learned from our research, which is what is the best way for people in the garment industry to be represented. And there was a split in the research, which was some people felt the union was the right way, another felt it wasn't. And using experience of Tim Nelson, who's done work in representation around the world, is to look at different models. Is it about empowering the people at work and investing in their skills and training to allow them to represent themselves, or is the union the right way to go? And so, along with a couple of other retailers, we're working with the unions to open the doors to encouraging our suppliers to open their doors and invite the unions in, and let's just test what models work best for them. And I think that's probably...
That's great. Thanks, Cheryl. Obviously, we've already been trailed there, Tony. The research that we commissioned demonstrated that clearly workers in Leicester actually, on the whole, did understand their rights, but they had no trust and pathway to enforce them. And they had no one on their side. And of course, who's on your side more than the trade union movement? Tony.
Thank you. I don't need to say a lot now, do I? Just by way of background, I'm Tony Tinley. I'm a regional officer based in the East Midlands. I've worked for Unite for 25 years, and more recently I've started moving over into project work, having been industrially involved prior to that. And that's how I picked this project up, getting on for nearly a year ago, and started working and building on the work that Lee Barron and Rob Johnson have done from the TUC, and I think that quite clearly needs to be acknowledged, because I think without the TUC this thing would not have got off the ground. Any of you who've worked with trade unions know it can be quite tricky to get a number of us into the same room without us falling out about everything within 5 minutes, and they've done a tremendous job of keeping us all together throughout the period of time. I think having said that, when I came in, and obviously the first thing I did, I read all these reports and all the research, I looked at the agreement, and the key thing that struck me about it was that we actually needed to get into these workplaces quickly, and we needed to start engaging and having conversations with the people who don't engage with universities for research, the actual real people on the ground. What are their real issues? And I think also looking at it, there's various models being talked about, but surprise, surprise, in my opinion, there is no difference, there is no easy solution. The only solution is to empower people to speak for themselves, because they're the only people who can understand the real issues. We might not even like what some of their issues are, and we may not like how they want to resolve them, but they're their issues and their problems, and they have to find their way of resolving them. So certainly the work I've been involved in has been doing some what I would call very soft sessions. So we've actually just been getting agreements with the factory owners, listening to what they have to say, and they've got some real concerns that I think aren't being fully addressed. So while some companies are looking up to say we want to maintain a manufacturing base, they can't control what the supply chain is doing, and this supply chain is doing exactly what every other supply chain is doing. It's making an amount of clothes themselves, and then it's offshored. I think every factory we've been in has talked about not possibly being in Leicester in 4 years' time, and their work, they were very busy, wouldn't be able to meet with us too soon because they'd rather go into Morocco or Poland or other parts of Eastern Europe. So we identify a problem in Leicester, all the good people come together to try and fix it, and what do the capitalists do? They move it to the next easy source of production. I'm not interested in Make UK, having it as a label, unless it's actually made in the UK, it's resourced in the UK, the raw products are resourced in the UK, and the people actually have a voice in the UK and are paid properly and appropriately. So to that end, what we've started doing, and this is going to take a long time, and that's the key thing with us, I think, is we've been going for 180 years, so we don't give in easy. We've had factories, I've worked on factories that I still haven't got organised after 25 years. I may have to give up when I retire, but that will be when I do. So I see this as a 5 to 10 year project, and what we're doing is making friends in those communities, talking to the people, identifying the potential leaders, supporting and encouraging them. They'll find the solution for this problem if the factories are still there.
Thanks, Tony. It's interesting to hear that, Cheryl, you've said, Boohoo made a commitment. They could have just walked away. Many retailers have left the UK. Their supply chain's been outsourced abroad, and potentially the issues we've seen in Leicester have been outsourced abroad as well. And of course, they're much less visible. And Tony, you rightly said that made in Britain should, as we say, should be a label of pride. And I think the commonality there is we have to fix the workers' rights situation in corporate supply chains here in the UK, because all we're then doing is displacing to developing countries that are less organised and where, quite frankly, there are lower standards of corporate governance. So I'm very grateful as a trust to have the support, and we're working with Boohoo and Unite, not necessarily natural partners, but what's impressive about the relationship we started, facilitated by the TUC with the trust, which does show that modern trade unionism can work with modern British business, make money, but also have workers that are paid well, upskilled, and are proud to be from Britain and proud to be Leicester. I'd like to say something because we would have had Adam from the City of Leicester here, and they've played an important role in this journey as well. Obviously, as a local authority, it should be the key local convener. They have a lot of statutory powers around their buildings enforcement. They have non-statutory soft powers, and the City of Leicester has done a lot of work. There's a lot more to do, and they're our partner in this journey as well. We're at Labour Party conference, so we don't have any member of the government on the panel. If we were at Tory Party conference, unfortunately, we would also not have a member of the government on the panel. And whilst the charity's apolitical, I am not. And it's fair to say in the dealings with number 10 and with Bays, they've said we've got the right enforcement structure. The legal powers exist, but the enforcement bodies on the ground are woefully underfunded, to the extent that when I spoke to some of the bodies, and I won't name them, they said to me, there's not a problem in Leicester, the data doesn't tell us that. And unfortunately, if you're not there, you don't get the data. There's a little bit computer says no, they haven't even switched the computer on. Anyway, that's my rant over. That wasn't in the speaking notes. I will write to the new Secretary of State, whoever it is, next week. What's also been great, Hope for Justice work in the UK, but also abroad, so bring that kind of broader perspective. And so, Philippa, I'd be interested to hear from you what you think. There is no silver bullet, but because I work in PR, really, give us your top 3 and what you think should happen. Immediate steps that could be taken, or wrongs that could be righted, particularly by those represented on the panel and also by those who are sat here in the audience.
I think the first thing that has been highlighted by people already is engagement with workers and people with lived experience is absolutely key. It's key to developing effective programming on the ground. It's also key to effective policy. If I was looking more top level, at a policy level, that's my area, we need to improve business compliance, and that's about transparency in supply chains right the way through into developing countries, and that needs to move from a transparency in supply chains legislation that should have teeth, firstly, to what we're seeing in the EU, which is mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence legislation, which is really recognising the broad spectrum of exploitation and also the intersection of human rights issues, including environmental issues around the intersection between slavery and climate change. Another top level would be actually we need to create a level playing field as well. So, for instance, legislation potentially having withhold and release orders for goods coming into the UK suspected to be made of forced labour. Third kind of really key area is we need to empower communities to actually create solutions because the power is in the community. But we also need to ensure that they have adequate resources and also access to low-cost and free legal advice. And one of the key areas is that we have massive legal aid deserts, particularly around immigration and immigration advice, but also employment advice. And people need to be able to access independent legal advice. Also, at a national and local level, multi-agency working is absolutely key. This does not neatly sit into one government department at a national or local level. So what we've seen is key in the development steps in Leicester is that multi-agency working with NGOs, businesses, local government, enforcement agencies working together. Absolutely key. Also, in terms of, stop me when I've got so many recommendations, there's a need to establish a single enforcement body. People are falling through the gaps in these different systems. There needs to be much more combined intelligence sharing, and also I would recommend we need to have a systems analysis to really understand the gaps in these enforcement agencies and where vulnerable workers are falling through these gaps. But also, we need that because for a vulnerable worker trying to locate where they need to go to for help and advice, there are multiple different helplines, multiple different areas. It's extremely confusing. Add on to that potentially issues around language, and that becomes almost inaccessible. And if we've got to have accessibility in the ability to access remediation more broadly.
Right, thank you. You make a very good point about the single enforcement body. We met with the Director of Labour Market Enforcement, and she showed me this kind of model of a chart of kind of the issue and the government agency it goes to. It's very complicated, and she needed explaining to her. She's the government's Director of Labour Market Enforcement, a very bright woman, very capable, and she finds it hard to navigate. So if you're a worker, you know what your problem is. You don't necessarily know what the kind of policy outcome is. And one thing we're very keen to see is almost taking the kind of child protection model of interagency working, so that the public bodies come together in a spirit of openness in order to protect the individual, rather than just deal with their characteristic of harm. And that's something we're advocating quite strongly, and we've been talking to the last number 10 about. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to get the single enforcement body in this Parliament, but there's a lot of steps that can be taken, as you've outlined, to almost get there in practice to make that difference to people on the ground, which is about having a single point of contact in Leicester where workers can go in language or in the community and get to explain their problem, and are then signposted and assigned a caseworker in order to get the kind of the right remediation outcome they want. And we're beginning to work with and help fund a group called FabL, which are based in Highfield Centre in Leicester, supported by Unite and the TUC and others, which is about having community workers on the ground helping, and their casework load has been massive. As I pointed out to enforcement bodies, if you ask, when you start to speak to people in South Asian community, in the Eastern European community in Leicester, there are many, many problems. They just don't know who to speak to and who to trust. And so it's a long road, as Tony says, but the part of that solution has to be worker empowerment themselves. Cheryl, you've mentioned the Levitt reports, with many recommendations, but in terms of your experience on the ground in Leicester, what's the one change that's made a practical positive difference for workers in your supply chain?
That's a big question. I think just the level of understanding of what's going on and the level of forensic investigation that we've done. We brought in, via Sir Brian Levison, a group of people who are ex-CID officers who did a forensic level of investigation. So I think there was obviously auditing and things that were going on before, but what was clear is that they weren't uncovering the level of issues. And we've now moved all of our suppliers. We work with about 45 suppliers in Leicester out of about 1,000 factories that exist there, but they're all moving to a different model of auditing. So I think that level of insight into what is going on, but I think that also comes with a level of frustration. You just mentioned single enforcement body. So I would agree that we spent a lot of time talking to lots of different government agencies, and there is a level of frustration when the answer you get is we don't have any resource, because at the end of the day you're dealing with people, so that isn't really the answer that you want to know. And I guess it would be remiss of me not to mention the research that the Human Rights Lab have done, because actually what that has done is given us insight into what people want. And whilst there is no silver bullet, there are some simple actions that need to be taken, which is about having a good command of the English language so they can understand their rights and activate them and use them and be empowered to deliver them, to have access to free, free advice that is, impartial, yeah, possibly, yeah. And then I think those are two things that they are saying to us are making the biggest difference for them as a community. But I think and it's also understanding what they want in terms of, and Tony, I hope you don't mind me saying, but there is a general distrust of authority. So how do we get over that to allow them to, because you talked about building friendships, and that is important, and building trust, because the Rights Lab was saying to us when they were doing the research that people were inherently distrustful of why they were being asked for their opinion. And most of us will work in organisations where our opinion is asked, so it would be remiss of us not to act on the things that they've told us to do, which I think when you look back at research that's going back 5, 10, 15 or 20 years, and things haven't changed, then that's the responsibility that we now hold as a trust.
Thank you. Tony, in your experience and the union movement on the ground, what are the kind of one or two or the key blockages or hurdles that remain? That sounds like we're nearly mission accomplished, well, of course not, but the kind of immediate hurdles which need to be overcome.
I think that clearly there's been a number of steps. I think it's important to recognise that this isn't a Leicester issue. This is a British capitalism issue. You know, I've worked on the campaign on Sports Direct, exactly the same issues, exactly the same horror. I worked on campaigns in Toyota up in Rotherham, exactly the same issues, exactly the same concerns. So it's a UK issue, not a Leicester issue specifically. And when we do talk to those people, and I think importantly one point I would make is when we when we do these lunchtime sessions, one, as you can see, I've had enough lunches anyway, and secondly, the last thing they need is another fat white bloke coming in telling them what's wrong and how to fix it. So I have not been to a single one of those sessions. We've sent the community workers in and we've sent our equality officers in, so that they're talking to people that they can readily identify with, because I think that's been part of the problem. So in immediacy, and one of the things that we've started looking at is how we can bring all the agencies together with Kevin's support in trying to say, because again, there's lots of people out there who want to do good things and want to provide support, and very often they're so disparate that again it's back to that list of who the hell do you turn to? So what we want to try and look is how do we bring that together. One of the things we learned from the Sports Direct campaign was we actually paid for a bus and parked it outside the factory. People will not travel for education, they will not travel for help and advice. You have to take it to them. So we have to look at ways, even if the High Cross Centre is near enough, or are there places that are nearer to their factories? When we talk to the factory owners, they'll tell us the thing they like about their factory is they'll have 50, 60 people working in there, and most of them live within 4 streets away. That's their community. So if anything's going to happen, it's got to happen within that space. So I think those are some of the initial things we can start doing. I think the issue in terms of the multi-agency thing is definitely needs to be done, but these are kind of corporate level changes that need to be made. The only way that you can fix this by whoever is in whatever factory, because again, you know, I've organised a fair few factories in my time, and it all starts exactly the same way. 2 men and a dog, you're lucky if the dog's got 3 legs, turn up to a meeting, a level of disinterest, you go back out and tell the mates about it, next time you do it, a few more turn up, then something will happen, it'll trigger a higher level of interest, and it all just takes time. So there is no quick, easy fix. There are these things that we can put in place to help speed up that process and give people some assurance and the confidence, because that's the one thing I think I saw when I was looking and talking to the workers. It's that level of confidence, and that's the first thing you need before you can support your colleagues. You've got to have the support of yourself, be confident enough to do something, haven't you?
It's very helpful.